So shall I buy a Gulfstream G650 or a Gulfstream G700? This is the question we're going to be answering in today's episode of Biz Jet TV, because there's lots of talk about the Gulfstream G700 as it was certified a few weeks ago, and there were 43 sitting on the tarmac over in Savannah, Georgia, and now Gulfstream have started to deliver these airplanes to the owners. There are some on the market as well that people have bought and decided to sell, but let's look at the differences between these two airplanes in today's episode. My name is Fabrizio, I'm your aviation advisor and the host here on Biz Jet TV. I'm also an airline transport pilot and the author of The Quantum Economy. I also offer my expertise in Avbuyer magazine every month, where I'm interviewing a number of private jet owners and ask them how they use the airplane as a business tool, because that's what it really is. The private jet is a business tool as long as you use it in a certain way. So anyway, let's get into the differences between these two airplanes. So the G650ER, there's been quite a few built by Gulfstream. They have Rolls-Royce engines, same Rolls-Royce engines we have on the G700, but they're different engines. They're the BR705 engines on the 650 and the Rolls-Royce Pearl and 700 engines on the G700. Now, the main difference is thrust. The ones on the G700 give more thrust, 36,500 pounds compared to 33,800 pounds. And the interesting thing is, even though the G700 engines are producing more thrust and the airplane weighs more, so it's a larger airplane, guess what? It burns less fuel. In fact, the G650ER burns 475 gallons per hour compared to 382 gallons per hour on the Gulfstream G700. Now, how does that translate into money? Well, if we look at the price of Jet A1, which is the fuel that's used by jets these days, at about $5 a gallon, on a 10-hour flight, we're talking $4,650 less flying on the G700 compared to the G650. So there you go, there's a fuel saving there. And that's just because of the technology. And it's not just in the engines, it's also in the aerodynamics. And this is the interesting thing. The wing design on the G700 is a new wing. It's got these winglets which allow the airplane to burn less fuel. So they've worked really carefully on the wing design and the fuselage and that to give it a smoother ride and also to decrease the fuel burn and the carbon footprint. This is something that Gulfstream have been doing. The other difference between these two airplanes is the cabin. Now, the cabin is basically the same size, but what Gulfstream have done, because they listen to their customers, there's quite a few complaints, in particular on a longer journey on the G650, and you're sitting in the back of hearing the noise of the engines. So what Gulfstream said, they thought, well, how can we reduce the noise in the cabin? So they decided to employ a series of engineers which were used to working on submarines, because submarines had the same problem. They didn't want to, it to be very noisy inside the submarine for the sailors that are on board. So they built this technology into the Gulfstream G500, 600, 700, and 800 series by doing whatever they did, technologically speaking, from an engineering standpoint. I'm not an engineer, from an engineering standpoint, they've managed to reduce the noise in the cabin, even though the airplanes are producing more thrust. So this is really a great feature that the G700 has, and that's a big difference. The other thing they did, as you probably noticed, is the windows on the G700 are a lot larger than the ones on the 650. So when you're up at altitude, there's more light coming into the cabin, which gives it a bit of a sense of, oh, I'm in a bigger aeroplane, but you're not. It's just more light coming in. So that's another feature. Now, if we look at range, pretty much same range, 7,500 nautical miles. Then let's look at landing and takeoff distance. Well, takeoff distance in the G650, 5,850 feet, while the G700 requires 6,250 feet. That's just a 400 feet differential there between the two aircraft. And of course, the G700 weighing a bit more needs a bit more runway. But the interesting factor is when we look at landing distance, the landing distance on the G700 is just 2,500 feet compared to 3,182 feet. So there's quite a big differential there on the landing distance. On the G700 needs less runway than the G650ER. So interesting, just to recap there, to make you understood, the G650ER requires less runway for takeoff but more runway for landing than the G700. Other feature we move into is the cabin pressurization. And I often talk about this, and jet lag is something that everybody seems to think that jet lag is to do with time zone change. And time zone change is just one of the factors that, comes into this whole jet lag thing. But one of the things is also cabin pressurization. And interestingly enough, you probably think, oh, well, I guess the cabin pressure in the G700 is less than the G650. No, it isn't. It's actually more. So if we take flight level 510, which is 51,000 feet, the cabin is 4,100 feet on the 650 and 4,850 feet in the new G700. Now, that's not much difference there, and you won't really feel that difference. The reason in the and they had to come to a compromise with the G700. If they wanted to reduce the noise, they had to sort of end up having the cabin pressure slightly higher. So the cabin altitude, basically, in the G700 is a bit higher than the G650. Now, the other thing is charter costs. Of course, being a newer aircraft, the G700 is going to cost more to charter. We're talking about $13,500 an hour compared to about $11,000 an hour you get in the 650. But that's simply because it's a newer airplane, and there are also less of them on the market because they just started to deliver them. Now, the other thing is, if you want to buy one today, the G700 is about 75 million compared to 65 million on the G650. Finding a G700 on the market, pre-owned market, there are some kicking around where people are just flipping their aeroplanes, and they usually comes with a premium. So you'll probably pay a bit more for it because you can have it delivered like next week kind of thing. While on the G650, there's quite a few on the market, and you can pick them up for anywhere between $32 to $45 million. So if you're thinking of the fuel burn, you can buy a lot of fuel for $20 or $30 million in difference. Now, with that, I'm not saying go and buy a G650, don't buy a G700. Now, let's go into the cockpit, because here there's quite a large difference between the two. Now, the G700 is continuing along with the G500, 600, 700, which incidentally is the same type rating, same qualification for the pilots. Once you qualified on one of them, you're qualified on all three. Not sure on the G800 if that will be same type rating or just a couple of days course for the pilots to be qualified. But, all four of these airplanes, the 5, 6, 7 and the 800, all have the side stick. This is the first time that Gulfstream had introduced a side stick into one of their airplanes and the fly-by-wire system. Now, bear in mind that Gulfstream build fighter jets. The famous F-16 is built by the same company that build the Gulfstreams. So they've taken this fighter technology and they've brought it into not only the aerodynamics but also into the cockpit. So two big features that this aeroplane has: it has the side stick, but the side stick is synchronized with the other side stick. So this is important. So when I'm moving the side stick on the left, the side stick on the right will move the same way. Well, in the 7X, for example, or even the Praetor 600, which is built by Embraer, or the famous Airbus A320, built by Airbus, which were the first ones to introduce a side stick and the fly-by-wire system to aviation. One of the problems that the pilots were having initially was if both pilots were maneuvering the side stick, who's actually flying the aeroplane? So what they did with the Gulfstream G700 is that, first of all, they built feel into the side stick, so you can actually get a feel for what you're doing. But the side sticks move together, so you can actually see who's flying the airplane. But, obviously, good pilots always say, I have control. And the other guy responds, you have control, so we know who's flying the airplane. So that's really, really important to understand, because there are some captains that like to interfere on the controls when the first officer's landing, which is not a good thing to do. You either fly the plane or you don't fly it. You don't try and, otherwise it's like, well, who's flying the airplane? So it's really, really important. So that's the first feature. The other feature is the touch control. So it's got all these screens in the cockpit, and it's a bit like an iPad. It's touchscreen. So this is another good feature that this airplane has. Now, that can be a little bit tricky when it's turbulence, because your hand's going to be doing that, and you got to press the right thing. So that can be a little bit tricky there. But I'm sure pilots are learning to do that. And you don't get all this turbulence, all the time. And usually once you hit the turbulence, there's ways of dealing with it and that. So I wouldn't say that's a no-no. But I certainly think the technology up front, making it more of a pilot-friendly cockpit, easier to use. This technology, lots of visuals, head-up display, projecting on the windscreen, which makes it easier for the pilot when you're landing in low visibility. So all these enhancements in the cockpit. So great advancement in technology here for the pilots in this G700. So I think if a pilot's watching this and thinking, should I go and get myself a type rating on a Gulfstream? I think investing in the 5, 6, 7, 800 series is probably a better investment to get. Also because on the market today, if you're a contractor, you can make between $3,000 to $3,500 a day as a contractor on the new G500, 5, 6, 700 series airplanes, compared to making about $2,500 to $2,500 a day if you're flying a G650. So you earn more money. Of course, the qualification costs more because there are only, I think, 2 simulators at the moment, and there's quite a queue of people wanting to get the type rating. But it's certainly the future. Gulfstream, have started this side stick thing with these airplanes. Speed-wise, pretty much the same. I've been advocating supersonic for a while and hypersonic. That's not happened yet, even though Boom Aerospace has started to test fly their airplane. It's an airliner, but can easily be turned into a private jet. So at the moment, all these private jets are flying pretty much at the same speed. You compare the G700 to the Global 7500 or the Falcon 8X, the speeds are pretty much the same. Cabin changes, style changes. I mean, what is a better aircraft? It all depends on what you're looking for. But at the end of the day, these airplanes, these private jets, are small compared to the airliners. And when you're flying on these small private jets for 10, 12 hours, as I always say, every hour you spend on these private jets, the cabin tends to, at least your perception of the cabin, it seems like it's getting smaller and smaller. Now, they often talk about it's a 15-seater, 16-seater, 18-seater airplane. These airplanes don't cater for 18 passengers, and I'll tell you why. Because the galley of the airplane is small compared to the galley in a Boeing business jet. Now, Boeing business jet is basically a Boeing 737, which usually flies 189 passengers, turned into a private jet. So the galleys are built for 189 people plus the crew. So add 3 or 4 flight attendants plus 2 pilots. So it's catering for that amount of people. But the private jets, I'd say the galley caters for about 6 people on a long distance flight. So you don't want to be flying 12 people across the Atlantic in a G700 because you're going to have a problem with stocking the food. Where are you going to put the food? Where are you going to put the rubbish, or the garbage as you call it in America? So you're going to have to stock it in the front toilet, which means now the pilots won't have a place to go if they need to go. They're going to have to go to the back of the cabin. So now you've got 15, 16 people all queuing up for the loo at the back, which is extremely inconvenient. So this is something that when I look at the number of seats, the seats are there and people can move about the cabin during a flight. Now, some people do, stock 12, 14 people on a short flight on these larger private jets, which is fine because you don't need much catering. But on the longer flights, my experience, passengers are usually 2 to 3 people. That's usually the case. In fact, the average number of passengers flying on a private jet are 3.5 passengers per flight. So now the environmentalists are going to hit me, and this is probably why the environmentalists are going on and on about private jet travel, because this plane is polluting the air and it's only flying 3 people when they could have flown EasyJet or Southwest Airlines. Now, again, I always say, the private jet is a business tool, and if used in the right way, as I say in my book, The Quantum Economy, I tell the stories of a number of people that use the private jet to build their business. If you're building your business, you're creating jobs, you're creating new technology as a result of flying private, you are overall, maybe you are polluting the air a bit more on that actual flight, but you're closing a deal which is giving thousands of jobs and manufacturing new technology which is environmental friendly. So you may pollute the air a little bit more on that flight, but then you're cleaning the air up with the technology you developed as a result of that flight. So that's the way to look at it. So all these environmentalists out there, they don't really know what they're talking about. They haven't done their homework properly. The private jet is a great business tool. Lots of businesses out there have been and are being built thanks to private jet travel. So private jet travel is here to stay. It's a great way of moving around. It's not an expense, as people say it is. It's expensive, it's stupid, etc., etc. No, it is if you use it to go to the hairdressers. But if you're using it to do business deals and you're using it to go in and out quick, then it's a great business tool. It's a time machine, basically. That's really, really important. So just to sum up the difference between the G650 and the G700, both great airplanes. If you've got the money, instead of paying money to the tax man, you may want to write off $75 million and buy yourself the new G700 to have all the comfort of this modern airplane and keep your pilots really happy because they're flying the latest and greatest technology up front there. But this is an airplane that's here to stay. I think Gulfstream are going to have great success with their new airplanes. I think they've done it right. Certainly they've got my endorsement. But the 650ER is still a great airplane. And if you've got a lower budget, why not buy yourself a G650 today, fly around for a few years, and then jump into a G700. So the G650ER has proven to be a great machine. It's a great business multiplier. helps you to get around. It's got that range which allows you to go from continent to continent in comfort. And as I said before, a little bit noisy at the back, but you tend to hear that on longer journeys because you've been sitting there for a while, which is why when they went back to the drawing board to design the G700, they factored that in to make sure that the cabin was quieter. And this is a big thing, when you're getting on a private jet, you're buying a private jet. A lot of people like to have quiet time on their private jets. So noise in the cabin is quite an important factor, and also the environment, so the pressurization in the cabin, the type of air that's circulating. And that's another thing I'd like to mention here. On the G700, they've been very careful at creating a good system for the air to circulate that purifies the air, and a better system than that one in the G650, because all those factors play into jet lag. It's not just the time zone change, it's the quality of the air, the pressurization. They all play into producing the jet lag or reducing the jet lag. So that's really important. So love to answer any questions you may have. Post questions below. If you want to speak to me, do a one-to-one call, ping me an email. And if you have read the book The Quantum Economy and posted a review on Amazon, you'll qualify for a free call with me. And remember to check out this other video I did recently with Jason Crandall, where he tells a story of how he built his drinks company by using private aircraft, and how he went from a small Cirrus all the way up to his Citation 4. It's a great story. And that's all from Fabrizio here on Biz Jet TV, and I'll see you on the next one.